So welcome to our first post-holiday season lecture of this year. And we are up to, this is lecture number 29, and we are up to Chelik Aleph. That's part one of the Guide to the Perplexed, chapter 37. I got COVID over Rosh Hashanah, and I was sick for a while, and now I just have this residual cough, so I'm feeling much better, but just forgive me and I apologize. But I and the Rambam, true to his style, the last few chapters were he dealt with some really profound, deep, and important philosophical ideas. So he took a break of going through the terms, and the last idea he talked about in chapter 36 was he went off on explaining why even the simplest person would be considered an infidel if they don't believe in certain basic concepts. And in the several previous chapters before that, we went through a lot of very deep, important ideas. Now, the Rambam once again is going to go off and go back to translating terms. So it's going to get more technical, more mundane, and it'll seem a little bit less philosophically stimulating. However, it is important to remember that he does this for a reason, because he wants us to go through the process of sometimes taking these very grand ideas and then showing you the nitty-gritty of how these ideas fit when you actually read the Torah and actually study. And he's going and he jumps back and forth so that you can get the sense and get the feeling for where he's going and what he's trying to teach us. So in chapter 37, he's going to talk about the term Panim, or face. Panim is and I'm going to be bouncing back and forth from English to the Hebrew and my own paraphrasing of things, and it's in the Pines chapter, part one. It's page 85, chapter 37. Panim. So panim is an equivocal term, right? Equivocal term meaning it has many different meanings. The same word means different meanings. Its equivocality being mostly with respect to its figurative use. In other words, sometimes it means an actual face, and sometimes it borrows that and means something else completely. And he's going to give several examples. And once you hear all these examples, you'll understand when you read a pasuk and it doesn't seem to make sense according to the philosophical principles the Rambam tells us we need to know. If you think about these meanings of panim, you'll understand what it's really trying to say. Thus, when it says "V'nehapchu kol panim lirakon," all faces turned into paleness, that was in Yirmiyahu and Jeremiah. So, or madua penechem ra'im. So there is referring specifically to people's face. Why is your face so sad? In other words, you have a sad look on your face. People were pale because they were starving, or they were in terrible horror or fear. This use is frequent. So there it's actually talking about a face. It is also a term denoting anger. Sometimes the word panim actually means anger. So for example, and her face was gone, right? This is in Shmuel Aleph, so again there it's referring to her anger, or no panel haylaod and shumash harbe. It's very often it's referring to the anger of God. It says Pnei Hashem chelkam, right? This is the face of God has divided them, or the face of the Lord is against them that do evil. My face shall go, and I'll give it. And so many examples. This use is frequent, where it's actually referring to anger, presumably because anger is visible on a person's face, and or a person who's angry looks at someone with an angry stare. It's just an image. So therefore, this use is frequent. It also could mean the presence and station of an individual, where it says, for example, he settled in the face of all his brethren, where at that point it means the face, meaning that he was on top of them. He was respected by them, right? In the face of all the people, I will be glorified. That's referring to God, right? So over there, it means something else. It means while the people are there. So in the face of them, it means while they're there, presumably because a face, people look with their eyes, they pay attention with their face. So when it's talking about their physical presence or their mental presence, it refers to them as a face, and so on. Surely he will blaspheme thee to thy face, meaning while you are there, while God is there. In this sense, it is also said, and the Lord spoke unto Moshe, and this is one of the places, the most famous places, God spoke to Moshe face to face, which obviously will seem to contradict on its surface one of the most basic principles, obviously, that God doesn't have a face. What does it mean that God spoke to him face to face? Rambam already explained to us that this wasn't some sort of an actual speech that you and I would have with each other, a physical speech, but it was a comprehension of Moshe, of a close comprehension of Moshe and God, between Moshe and God. So what does that mean? Which means as a presence to another presence without an intermediary, right? There was direct, face to face. There was nothing in between. There was no intermediary, is the word Rambam chose. For example, come let us look one another in the face, as opposed to let's send messengers, let's send letters, let's send texts, emails. Let's the page number that we're on now in the Pines is page 86. Thus scripture says the Lord spoke with you face to face. Okay, again, hence this kind of speaking and hearing are described as being face to face, meaning it's the most direct possible way without anything in between. Accordingly, it is said, then he heard the voice speaking to him, which that's an example. What does it mean he heard the voice? Because a voice is a disembodied way of communicating. It's just a voice. There's nothing there that you see that's blocking it, that's producing it. It's going through the air, and so to speak. So when that experience of Moshe hearing a voice is described as face to face, meaning there's no intermediary. There's nothing blocking it. There's nothing catching it, processing it, and then putting it out. So it has accordingly been made clear to you that the hearing of a speech without the intermediary of an angel is described as being face to face. And that's what it also means when it says, "Upanai lo yera'u," but my face shall not be seen. What does that mean? My face shall not be seen, meaning that the true reality of my existence cannot be grasped. So in this case, face is, again, it's meaning something even more. Each time Rambam gives an example of the meaning of the word face, it kind of derives from the one before it, but takes it even farther into meaning something else, right? So here, the face is also an adverb of a place that is rendered in Arabic by the words "in front of thee," meaning in thy presence. It is often used in the sense with regard to God, may be exalted, meaning in the face of God, right? Or but my face shall not be seen is understood interpretation of Onkelos, and those in front of me shall not be seen. So what does that mean? He indicates by this that there are likewise. Okay, so for something that's important, and we've touched on this concept before. In the Rambam understood everything in an Aristotelian language as every physical being that we see, that we interact with directly, is something that has both chomer and surah. It has matter and form, right? So the form. So the matter is what we see. The table has matter, it's made out of wood or whatever, and the form is the energy and the force and the inherent thing that gives the table its properties. Now, every physical being that we see has matter and form. However, there are what the Rambam calls the separate intellects. Those are the forces of nature, so to speak, right? Which we don't see. They don't have form. Now, we today obviously conceive of reality and science differently than the Rambam did, but of course we do, because even these forces of nature, we more and more we are able to quantify them and describe them and understand that that there are particles that are carrying these forces. But if you imagine a world without knowing that, you see a world where things either have matter and form, but then beyond that, there are these forces, or these forces of energy, which animates things. But those forces, they exist, but they don't have any chomer and surah. Those are what Rambam calls the separate intellects, or the sichalim hamuvdalim, or hanivdalim, right? The intellects that and ultimately it's those forces which, in Aristotle's scheme and in the Rambam scheme here in Mor Nevuchim, ultimately leads back eventually to God. In other words, God created God is the prime mover in Aristotelian terms. God is the one that created something, and from that came that, from that came that, from that came that. Ultimately, that's what makes the whole world go, right? So it's these sechalim nivdalim, which a human being cannot comprehend, cannot sense, cannot measure, right? Those are the things that the things that are in front of me shall not be seen. There, he indicates by this that there are likewise great created beings whom man cannot apprehend as they really are. There are things out there that we can't comprehend, that we can't measure. Those are the forces that I'm just referring to. These are the separate intellects, the Chalim Hanidalim, which I mentioned before. They have been thought to be in relation to God as being constantly in front of him in his presence. Rambam is going to explain this later when it comes to Hashgacha, the providence of God, and that works through this force, these forces, these Chalim Hanivdalim. In other words, God's attention that he pays, so to speak, to those things are stronger in a sense than the attention that he pays to the things that are much, much farther down the line. I know that's a very, very, very powerful statement, and it's going to raise 1,000 questions, but we're going to deal with those ideas, Rambam's understanding and concept of what Hashgacha is, what Hashgacha Pratis is, and what it means when Chazal teach us about angels behind every blade of grass and so on. But the idea being, just to make it a really, really, really short version, is that God is God, right? Incomprehensible, way beyond anything that we can imagine. But through some process, the world is the creation goes through all of these forces, which go down farther and farther and farther until you get to the Chomer and Surah that we see. But those forces we cannot see. There are creations. They were created by God. And if I try to use modern terminology, the forces of electromagnetic forces that push so much of what we see in the world driving the world are things that we don't see, but they are also creations of God, but they're closer and closer and closer to the source. On the other hand, the things that in his opinion, I mean of Onkelos, right, can be grasped in their true reality, those are such that are beneath the separate intellects. Those are the things that are beyond that. The things that you can see in respect to their ranks in that which exists. I mean, things that do have chomer and surah, they do have matter and form. So the things that we do see, those are much lower down. Those, right, panai lo yerau, my face you cannot see, right? But the other stuff, right, you can see. Those are the things, the created things, the objects that we see and interact with all the time. Of them, Onkelos said, and thou shalt see that which is behind me, right? That which is behind me, and that's going to be the next chapter. What is behind me? Behind me are those things that have physical manifestations that we could look at and see and measure and touch and feel and taste, etc. He means the beings from which I have, as it were, turned away, and upon which, speaking in parables, I have turned my back. It doesn't mean actually that God turns his back. It means those are the things which I gave physical form to, so that they're closer to human beings and they're farther down this hierarchy. Further on, you shall hear my interpretation of that which was demanded by Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Face can also mean an adverb of time, meaning before or ancient. So in the face of Israel, right? Or in the face, thou did, meaning in the beginning, way back. Panim meaning the beginning, the front, a long time ago. Face could also mean protection and providence. Thou shalt not bear the face of the poor and the honorable man who does not bear the face. This use is also frequent. In this sense, it is also said, the pasuk, Yisah Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. God should put his face towards you. What does that mean over there? It means his protection, his providence, right? God should put his face, because again, people look. He started off saying that the face, people look in anger, but people also look to pay attention, to care for something. That's a different use of the word face. So again, one of the strong lessons from this chapter is that one cannot argue that the term face could have lots and lots of different meanings depending on the context. Therefore, if you see a verse such as God spoke to Moshe face to face, right, that seems to contradict Rambam's idea that there's that anthropomorphism is wrong and heretical, right? So, but the verse says God spoke face to face. It becomes obvious that it doesn't actually mean a face. It means something else. And the Rambam explained to us what it means. So before we move on to the next term, anybody have any comments about face? Can anybody think of a place where it says the word face and what it might mean there?
Close with the priestly blessing that you say it twice, so that you already explained that.
Yeah, it's the priestly blessings. Rambam just mentioned that one, and there he says that it means God should put his face, meaning his protection, his providence, his paying attention to you. Any other comments about faces? If not, we'll go on to the next one. If you think of something later, feel free to chime in. We have about, I don't know, maybe about all the way to chapter 45. So we have another I don't know, 8 or 9 chapters or so of term by term. We're just going to have to go through them because remember, I decided we're doing this in order. and then when after that, he's going to bounce off into some really, really big time, interesting philosophical ideas. But we got to get through the nitty gritty too, to get an appreciation for what Rambam is trying to accomplish here. He goes through all of these interesting, fascinating philosophical ideas. And then he said, well, now let's look at the psukim. Let's see the verses and how do I fit all this into all these words? And he's giving us example after example so that we have the tools that we need, that when we encounter a verse that it perplexes us and it contradicts ideas that we know, we'll know how to read it. And that's the goal of Rambam here. So back, the next one is the word Achor. Achor is also an equivocal term. I'm just starting.
One question.
Go ahead.
Aren't all these terms equivocal? Why is he starting off? Why is he picking up these terms as equivocal? Is there a hierarchy that some terms are more equivocal? We've read means that everything.
No, I think he's picking some of the terms that are the most direct. Well, first of all, he's doing that chapter in Shemos of that encounter between God and Moshe, right? He's picking terms from that parak, right? I pointed that out probably, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, that almost all of these terms are to be found in that parak. Not all, there's some exceptions, but those exceptions are all similar terms that are used in other places in Tanakh, where encounters between a human being, typically a prophet, and God, right, are described. And those terms pop up there, and they present the strongest challenge to the primary idea that the Rambam is trying to get across, right? That primary idea is he wants to vehemently abolish anthropomorphism, right? So that's why he's choosing these terms. But the key thing is that he told us this many times, that there's going to be lots and lots and lots of things that he's not telling us, right? He's just giving little tidbits. The idea is that all of us perplexed people should have the tools to analyze when we have other philosophical ideas that we know to be true, and then they're contradicted by a verse. How do you read it, right? So that's the lessons that we're getting to learn now. So the next thing is Achor, right? Shem Meshutaf is also an equivocal term. It's Hushem Hagav, and its simple meaning, it is the back, right? The Gav is the back of a person's back, right? Thus. And it says Achore HaMishkan, the back of the Mishkan. So there's a front and there's the back, right? Vatetze hachanis me'acharav, and the spear came out through his back, right? So this is just a simple example of it referring to a back. But sometimes it also is referring to it in the sense of time. It is an adverb of time. So for example, the Acharav lo kam kamohu, again referring to Moshe, it literally that would translate, and to the back of him there never stood up anyone like him. Now, in almost every translation you'd see of that verse, it wouldn't translate the word Acharav, meaning literally the back. It would come out sounding very awkward in English. So they always translate it, and after him, no one came up, no one ever existed that was like him, that was of his stature. So intuitively, we translate that word v'acharav as meaning afterwards, even though the actual meaning of the word is the back, or achar hadvar mohela, after these words. And that's how anyone would translate that verse. After these things happened, right? some this and this happened, and then the verse goes on. But achar again here is being used. It started off meaning back, and then it started meaning after. V'zeh harbe, and there's many such examples. I'm sorry if I bounce back and forth between English and Hebrew, but hopefully you can follow roughly what I'm doing. There's no rhyme or reason necessarily to why I do that. I just have both in front of me, and whatever looks better at the time. So the term also is meaning of following and imitating. So because it means behind, when we imagine in our minds a leader walking, and then his followers are walking behind him, doing the same things, copying the things that he does, right? So sometimes it would mean following and imitating the conduct of some individual with respect to the conduct of life. So for example, the verse, "Ye shall walk at the back of the Lord your God." In Hebrew, that verse reads, "Acharei Hashem Elokechem telechu," right? After the Lord your God, right? Telechu, you should go. What does that mean? You should look at God and he's walking. Obviously, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean you follow him around. It means you follow him in the sense that you act in his ways. He teaches you how to act, and then you do that. Acharei Hashem yilechu, same idea. Kolomar, meaning in obedience to him and imitating his acts and conducting life in accordance with his conduct. This is the first time Rambam introduces that idea, but it's an idea that you find throughout Judaism, and that's the idea that we're supposed to walk in the ways of God and act the way God acts, so that if the Torah teaches us attributes of God, that's how we're supposed to act. So that's what this means here. Rambam's going to deal with
Israeli commanders.
Go ahead.
The Israeli commanders say acharai. It's the same idea.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good right. Acharai, and right, obviously he doesn't mean jump on my back, right? He means it. So now it's already understood to mean that, and he means follow me, do as I do, right? So again, acharei tzav, after I command, right? And so again, the same thing. Literally, the translation. So the Pines purposely translates this verse in a way that I don't think you'll find any translated Chumash translating that verse. He walked at the back of a commandment, right? Anyone would translate it means he followed the commandment, right? But the Pines is deliberately translating it literally so that you should get the sense of a word that originally means one thing being used in a different context. In this sense, it is said, "And thou shalt see my back." So now let's go to the big question. So what does it mean when God said, "Ufanai, you can't see my face, but you can see my back," right? Which is "Uvira'isa es achoroi." So someone might think, "Oh, look, God has a back." And Moshe saw God's back, right? But obviously that can't possibly be. So what does it mean? It means you shall apprehend what follows me. You can't see my face because you can't know my essence, like we just said in the previous chapter. But you can follow me. You can follow my ways, right? You can be like me, you can act like me, you can do like me, you can follow the instructions I gave you, but you can never understand me. And that's how Rambam translates that pasuk, ufanai lo yera'u, right? But vira'isa sacharai, but you can see my back, which means and it follows necessarily from my will, that is all the things created by me, which we'll explain later on in chapter 54. Like I said, he's going to drop all these things, and then he's going to have a series of chapters where he's going to go into profound philosophical ideas. And in that chapter 54 is where Rambam goes into this the concept of being like God, of acting like God, and so on. And that's not that far off in the future. We'll probably get there in maybe 2-3 weeks.
Can I ask one question?
Go ahead, please. Yes.
Since this is the chapter I read, I think it was an Art Scroll commentary that said the back means you can see my effect in history. You can see what I've done. You can't see what I will do, but you can see my back.
That's certainly an interesting, that's not what the Rambam is saying, but that is definitely a very interesting way of translating that. I mean, it makes sense. It's a nice way of translating it. But Rambam here is saying a different idea. But yeah, there's Torah has a lot of different facets. But yeah, that is a beautiful way of understanding it as well. So here, just again, Rambam says, "Ufanai lo yeru," meaning you will never be able to see me because there are no intermediaries, there are no forms which I take. God says God doesn't have a chomer or a tzura. He's in something that we can never understand. But behind me, you can act like me, you can be like me, you can learn from me. You could follow me, right? But that's it. Okay, so that's the next one. The next chapter. Any other comments on faces or backs? Or any comment? I don't care. You can fire away. All right.
A quick,
Please, go ahead.
Follow on to what Jeff noted. Well, firstly, the commentary that whether you're talking within a physical proximity domain or within a time domain makes beautiful sense, right?
Mhm.
But to the point that Jeff made about the art scroll comment, it reminds me a little bit of the black hole, in the sense that we can't necessarily, for those that are familiar with a little bit of astrophysics, we can't necessarily see the black hole, but what we can see are the effects of the black hole.
That's an interesting. That's a very good analogy. I like that. That's a way for us to kind of conceptualize what Rambam is teaching us about God. You know, obviously God isn't the black hole, but he left them out there at least partly for the reason that we should be able to use that to understand what Rambam is talking about. That's really good. So you can see all of its effects. You can measure the forces that are around it that are a result of the black hole, but you can't actually see the black hole.
Of course,
I
there's
like
a
that.
terror associated, because if you get too close to the black hole, you disappear. You can't exist at a certain geographic proximity.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, that's really good. So that's a good way for us to conceptualize it. So now, excuse me, let's try to do a lave. We'll try to knock out a bunch of these now, because I mean, obviously this is all beautiful stuff, but you know, we all want to get to the meat. So let's keep going. So the lave is literally a heart, right? It's also a shem mishutaf. It's also a word that has many meanings. And again, in general, each meaning derives from the original meaning, but has a totally different meaning. So let's try it, see how that works. By the way, on the lave is interesting because remember that in Rambam's time, they were still in the science world of Rambam's time, they're still trying to figure out the functions of the different organs of the body. It wasn't really fully understood whether consciousness is in the brain or in other parts of the body. Nowadays we have a pretty good idea where our consciousness lies, where our thoughts lie. And if I had to ask any modern person, if there's a soul, where do you think that soul is in the body? And you got to pick a place, an organ. Almost all of us would say, well, the brain. But meanwhile, and I might get this wrong, I can't remember, but there was huge debates between Hippocrates and Plato eventually, and Aristotle, and this and that. But Aristotle was one of the guys who felt that the heart was really where a lot of our thoughts and our emotions resided. Aristotle made the heart into a huge deal, and Rambam, following that, also believed that. Nowadays we pretty much look at the heart as a pump. It's exciting for a lot of reasons. It's obviously a very important organ, but we don't generally think, at least scientifically, we don't think of the heart as a place where any significant amount of thinking or emotions are going on. But the Rambam did think of it that way, and therefore, and in the time when the Torah was given, we'll see how the term heart was used, and that's what we're about to study now. So leiv is a shem mishutaf. It's an equivocal term, right? It is a term referring to the heart, the organ. Now, this is really important. The part of the body in which resides the principle of life of every being endowed with the heart. So life originates from the heart. We have to think about this in terms of Rambam's understanding of medicine. And Rambam was taking this from Galen, right? And Galen was the primary, and Avicenna, and those are some of the, Avicenna being a Persian doctor, I think the 5th, 6th century, I can't remember exactly. Someone could correct me if I have it wrong, but early Muslim days, maybe it's 7th century, I don't know, somewhere around there. And who also took a lot from the Roman physician Galen, who was a physician slash philosopher in, I think, the 2nd or 3rd century. And they believed that in the heart was life, right? This life force, and that life force was pumped by the heart out into all the organs of the body. This is an interesting aside in the halachic world. When offline, if someone asks, I can send some people some articles about this. A friend of mine, Dr. Eddie Reichman, he writes a lot about the medical history and halacha. He's a big Talmud Chacham, and he's a professor of emergency medicine at Einstein in New York. But he wrote a whole article showing how the argument over whether or not, when it comes to the laws of organ donation, there becomes this huge debate about when a person can be halachically declared dead, brain death versus heart death, and so on. That the thrust of the idea that that heart death defines death in halacha comes from this notion of which is really originated in Galen and in Aristotle, and which what we're reading here. And it may, so some people argue, is that valid today, since we now know the heart? I'm not getting into that now. That's not the point of today's lecture. But you can see how here, that's one area where philosophy kind of started to float off and possibly influenced law in some very significant ways. But the bottom line is that the Rambam views the heart as the place where the principle of life resides of every being endowed with a heart, because they were aware in Rambam's days that some very early creatures didn't really have a heart. Thus, and he thrust them into the heart of Avshalom, right? So that's another, which is clearly referring to the assassination of Avshalom, killing where and it was put in his heart, right? So, and it's referring to the actual organ, and that's why he died, right? So, and as much as this part is in the middle of the body, so the heart is also used to designate the middle of everything. So throughout the Torah, you will find, and this part of the thinking is that everything goes from the center out. There was all kinds of debates as to how the embryo develops, is it top to bottom. So some believe it has to be start from the heart because it goes from in to out, and the heart being the center of everything. And it kind of is in the center, right? So the term, so thus unto the heart of heaven, the heart of fire. Okay, fine. And it also denotes thought. And remember, in the Rambam's scheme, this made a lot of sense because he actually believed that thought was going on in the heart. In our sense, we could still say it doesn't contradict the way we know science today. We could still use it as a metaphor. We could still use it as a word that describes what we think. We still talk about my heart yearns for things. We still talk about, how do you feel inside your heart, even though actual feeling isn't happening there. But so it can mean went not in my heart, which means thou was present in my thought when this and this happened. In other words, were you in my heart? Meaning, was I thinking about you, or was I thinking about this? Was it in your heart? So in the similar sense, it says, and that ye go not about after your own heart, which means don't go after your own thoughts. Don't follow your own thoughts. But rather in that context there, it means you go after what God wants you to do, as opposed to what you decide on your own, you think you should do, right? It is also then, again, so now that we made it being your own thoughts, it also refers to your own opinion. So all the rest of Israel were of one heart to make David king. In other words, everyone agreed together that the proper person for us to anoint as king would be David, right? So and that is the so that's what it means. Everyone was with Lev Echad, with one heart. So the meaning they shared the same opinion. A similar meaning is to be found in the dictum, but fools die for want of heart, meaning they have no desire to wait 1 second. B'choser leiv yamusu. They die because they simply don't think, right? They don't do what they should do. They're not thinking. They're not using their thoughts. They're not using a reason. So that would be a reason why fools die. Okay, so which is intended to signify through the deficiency of their opinion, meaning the deficiency of their thought process. You live life without thinking about it, you end up dying because of it. Let's see. through the, okay. And in the same way, my heart shall not turn away so long as I live. The meaning of which is my opinion shall not turn away from and shall not let go of this matter. From the beginning, this passage reads, my righteousness I hold fast and will not let it go. My heart shall not turn away so long as I live. So in my opinion, is with this reference to this meaning of, give me 1 second, I apologize. Let me get the Hebrew out here because I'm getting lost in the English. Lo yecheraf levavi miyamai inyono lo notsa dati v'lo sara min hadavar hazeh. I did not allow myself to, I concentrated on this all the time. I held on to my righteousness. This is Eob talking. This is Job talking, right? V'lo erpeh, and I didn't loosen up. I didn't lose a grip on it. Lo yecheraf levavi miyamai. So what does it mean, yecheraf here, right? It's similar to the word shifchon necherefes leish, where the Torah says a maidservant who is necherefet, who is tied to or bound to a man, similar to an Arabic term menachrefa. I don't know. Kolomar natsa mi kinyan ha'abdus l'kinyan ha'itchus. Meaning in that case she was necherefes leish, meaning she was pulled away from her obligations of being a maidservant, of being a slave, and instead tied to the man by being having a tie of being of a spousal relationship. So other examples. So the bottom line of all of this is that when you think about something, that's your attachment to it, right? And that's why it uses the term lave. I'll skip a little bit, and there are times when God says this, right? Because it says kasher bilvaviu v'nafshi ya'aseh, right? Meaning when God says I will do as I want, when he's trying to impress that upon us, he'll use in my heart, and so on. And similarly, when it says lev chacham liyamino, what does that mean? Thinking about the heart of a wise man is to his right, meaning that my mind, I'm thinking about things. The right is the solid, the complete, the whole. A chacham, a smart person, thinks about real things, thinks about real concepts. And there are so many such examples. And similarly, when it refers to God, it refers to we mentioned that before. It refers to God doing the way he sees fit. Or when God tells us to pay attention to him and to pay attention to his instructions, pay attention in your heart. And so it's very many similar examples. So, and there it's talking about an intellectual attachment. God did not gave you a heart to know. You were shown in order that you know this. However, when it says the famous term from Shema, that you should love God with all of your heart, there it means, Rambam tells us, with all of the strength of your heart, meaning everything you have in your body, because everything comes from the heart. The heart is gives the life force to the whole body. According to Rambam here, means with your entire body, with everything that's in your body. And the intent is that every single thing that you do with your entire body should be, the purpose of it all should be in order that you should understand and know God. This is Rambam really melting the principle of the Sefer down in that one phrase, which is really powerful. The heart is the center. I'll make it clear. I know I kind of jumbled, but I'll try to lay it out straight. The heart is the center of the body, gives life to the whole body. Rambam feels that the purpose of our entire physical life is to come to an intellectual greatness, which is this understanding of God. So v'ahavta es Hashem b'chol levavcha is referring to everything you do with your lave, your entire physical body, whose root is the heart. The purpose of it should be v'ahavta es Hashem, it should be in order to know and know God. So, and that would be the Rambam's explanation. So the summary of this whole thing is that the word lave refers not necessarily can refer to the heart physically, but it also refers to the intellectual attention that we pay towards things that occurs in the heart itself. So those are the three terms I think we can close up with those terms tonight, is the terms of Panim, Achor, and Lev. And we heard some really nice explanations of different verses in the in the Torah and so on, some familiar verses. I'll open the floor to comments before we close it up for the night.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
As this group has heard, I'm sure, a million times, in the Shema, there's the duplicate letter. And we are taught it refers to Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov.
Mhm.
With all your heart, with all the, with your good inclination, your bad inclination.
Right.
It's his, the fact that this is mentioned here, does this mean that Maimonides doesn't endorse this Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara because for the duplicate letter that?
I think that's more, I think he's giving his explanation of the verse, but I don't think that necessarily negates the other things that we find in Chazal. The way the Rambam looks at what it means, a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov, is another subject we'll get to at some point, what that means. But essentially the Yetzer Ra is it's man's inclination towards the physical. I mean, but we'll do that at another time. But I don't think this negates his understanding of that. I think it's just an alternate explanation, based on focusing here on the meaning of the word lave, the meaning of the word heart. Any other comments about these words?
I have a question about.
Sure, please.
It seems like the Rambam is laying out different senses of the terms, with common terms, and I was wondering if there are dictionaries in Israel that adhere to, or in Hebrew, that will go down for each term and specify the different senses that each of these terms mean.
I'm sure there are. I'm not an expert in that, but I mean, clearly, I'm sure just that, a good, decent Hebrew dictionary would define the different meanings of these words.
Jastro is one thing that comes to mind, that is really extensive in terms of its coverage of the various meanings of the terms, particularly as they're found in
on the Gemara.
Yeah.
I mean, Jastro is more focused on Aramaic than Hebrew, but yeah, it is an amazing job. And Hebrew too in there, but mostly focused on the Aramaic of the Talmud. Yeah, so next week we could have a bunch of terms again. We might be able to knock out like 4 or 5 and get to chapter 46 in just 1 week. But 46, we actually did touch upon 46. I read parts of it already before, but we'll do it again, because when we hit 46, he's going to go through a couple chapters, some really, really deep and important philosophical ideas. But we still got a couple more terminologies to get through. And then he'll go through a bunch of ideas, and then he'll go back to the simple nitty gritty again, and he'll go back and forth. That's the fun of this book.
So, Rachel,
yes,
what I'm kind of gleaning from all of this is that Rambam is, I mean, if we go to his 13 principles, he says it explicitly. God is without body. But what's interesting is that some of these are anthropomorphications of God that reference a body, and so in some ways this is Rambam's, and I don't want to say this in a derogatory sense, rationalization of his dare I say it, heartfelt belief that that God is without body.
Well, absolutely. I mean, he's very explicit about that repeatedly, over and over again. You're 100% right. You got it spot on, but he's not hiding it at all. He's trying to explain to us all of his philosophical ideas play in, like when we read through these chapters, we touched on other ideas like acting like God, learning from God, following his instructions. A lot of philosophical ideas he threw in there, but one overlying and probably overarching and most important philosophical idea that he really wants to bang into our heads is to stay away from any anthropomorphic description of God. And all of these terms are being chosen for exactly the reason that you said that, explicitly so by the Rambam, because these are the places which describe God in the most anthropomorphic terms you could imagine. And he's trying to show us that when you read it carefully, you see that it's not anthropomorphic at all, At least that's what he's trying to prove to us. If somebody wanted to disagree with him, he'd say, what are you talking about? It says heart. Heart is a heart. So God must have a heart. But no, the Rambam is saying, no, that's not what it means. But you're absolutely right. That's the point. That is exactly the point.
Could I ask one maybe final question?
Yeah.
Going back a little bit, I know about God and sort of, I'm learning, okay, it's
Yeah.
time. I know about angels, a lot of angels. I know about humans, okay?
Mhm.
Those are the only three categories of, quote, intellects, if you will, that I've ever heard of. Could you give me a preview of what's to come? What other kinds of beings, intellects are out there in his world other than God and angels and humans?
Well, angels is an interesting subject, and we did discuss this a little, and he touched on it today, that the Rambam views angels as forces of nature. Angels are created beings, just like you and I, except that they're a higher level of created beings that don't have a Homer and a Tzura, right? They don't have a, so you can argue, and I think this is true, that a force of nature, I mean, Rambam, when he talks about demons or, bad angels, the Rambam looks at that as the forces of nature that cause suffering, like disease, right? So you and I, now we know it's a coronavirus, it's a bacteria, it's a this or that, right? That cause disease. Rambam would have said, so he wouldn't have had a problem. So we just found the Homer and the Tzura, the form and the, because now we can look at it under a microscope. But Rambam would have looked at the angels as the forces of nature that make everything go. Now, that we can't measure it or see it with our eyes. Nowadays, we might be able to measure it with the radiation with a Geiger counter and electromagnetism with some whatever. But that's how Rambam looks at it. And as you get higher and higher, eventually there is a God, right? And that God is making it all go. Exactly how, we could learn more and more about how, but we'll never actually figure out, the nature of God himself. That's the one thing that we'll never figure out because it's impossible.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna have to call it a night, but I really appreciate that everyone came back and joined us, and looking forward to next week. We'll continue with more of these terms, and we'll keep rolling. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Yeah.